On a routine transatlantic flight from London to Washington, D.C., a senior flight attendant with an impeccable 20-year record made a choice rooted in prejudice. In the hushed, exclusive atmosphere of the first-class cabin, she saw a black couple and decided they didn't belong. She denied them the service and respect afforded to every other passenger, her contempt a silent, ugly stain in the pristine environment. But this couple was not who she thought they were. They carried a secret, not in their luggage, but in their pockets, a secret bound in dark blue leather and stamped with gold, capable of grounding a career and creating an international incident. The cabin of Transatlantic Airways flight 715 was a sanctuary of muted luxury. The scent of warm towels, expensive leather, and a hint of jasmine air freshener mingled in the climate-controlled air. Passengers in the first-class suite settled into their pods, the soft clinking of crystal glasses, a gentle precursor to the 8-hour journey from London Heathrow to Washington Dulles. It was a world Riley Young had curated and controlled for over 2 decades. At 54, Riley was the epitome of a senior flight attendant. Her uniform was immaculate. Her blonde hair was swept into a chignon so tight it seemed to pull the corners of her eyes back, giving her a look of perpetual scrutiny. She moved through the cabin with an efficiency that bordered on brusque, her smile a thin, practiced line that rarely reached her pale blue eyes. Riley believed in order, in standards, in a certain kind of passenger who deserved the opulence of first class. Her gaze swept across her domain. In 1A and 1B sat a tech CEO she recognized from a magazine, already tapping away on his laptop. Across the aisle were the Murphys in 1D and 1F. Dr. Justin and Dr. Annalise Murphy were a striking couple. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thoughtful, composed face and close-cropped hair lightly dusted with grey at the temples. He wore a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blazer over a collared shirt. She was elegant, with intelligent, warm eyes, and hair styled in intricate locks, adorned with a few subtle gold cuffs. She was reading a dense-looking book on international jurisprudence. To Riley, however, they were an anomaly, an irritation. She had seen their names on the manifest, Dr. and Dr. Murphy, but her mind had already dismissed the titles. In her experience, people like that in first class were usually athletes or musicians, loud and flashy, using vouchers or points to get a taste of a world they hadn't earned. These two were quiet, but that almost made it worse. It felt, to her, like a performance of belonging. "Pre-departure beverage, Mr. Henderson?" she asked the tech CEO, her voice syrupy sweet. "Champagne, perhaps? A sparkling water?" She served him with a flourish, then moved on to the other passengers, her path conspicuously circumnavigating seats 1D and 1F. Justin Murphy looked up from his newspaper, catching her eye. He gave a polite, expectant smile. Riley looked straight through him, turning her attention to the passenger in 2A. Annalise gently placed her hand on her husband's arm. "Patience, my love," she murmured, her voice too low for anyone else to hear. "Let's not begin the journey with friction." Justin nodded, his jaw tight for a fraction of a second before relaxing. They had endured far worse slights in far more dangerous places. This was just disappointing. A younger flight attendant, a bright-eyed woman named Sophie, noticed the omission. "Riley," she said softly in the galley, "you missed the couple in 1D and F." Riley was arranging champagne flutes on a tray, her movements sharp and aggressive. "I didn't miss them, Sophie. I'll get to them when I get to them. They can wait. Probably not used to this kind of service anyway. It'll be a novelty whenever it arrives." Sophie frowned, a knot of discomfort tightening in her stomach. "They seem perfectly lovely." "They all do at first," Riley sniffed, her prejudice laid bare in the supposed privacy of the galley. "Just watch. The entitlement will come out. I've been doing this for 23 years. I know the signs." Before Sophie could argue, Riley swept back into the cabin, tray in hand. She continued her rounds, the deliberate exclusion of the Murphys now becoming a palpable, awkward silence in their section of the cabin. The man in 2D, a seasoned business traveler named Ben Carter, watched the entire exchange over the top of his tablet, his brow furrowed. He discreetly angled his phone on his lap, ensuring the camera was pointed forward, and pressed record. He'd seen this kind of petty power trip before, and it always turned ugly. Finally, with all other first-class passengers served, Riley stopped at the Murphys' row. She didn't make eye contact, instead focusing on a spot on the bulkhead wall behind Justin's head. "Can I get you something?" she asked, her tone flat, devoid of the warmth she had offered everyone else. "Yes, thank you," Justin said, his voice even and calm. "I'll have a sparkling water with lime, please." "And for you, madam?" Riley asked, her eyes flicking to Annalise for a brief, dismissive moment. "I'll have the same, thank you," Annalise replied, her smile unwavering. Riley nodded curtly and retreated to the galley. When she returned, she held 2 plastic cups, the kind usually reserved for economy class. She thrust them onto the small console between their seats without a tray or a napkin. The lime wedges were thin, pathetic-looking slivers. Every other passenger had received their beverages in heavy crystal glasses. Justin looked at the plastic cup, then at the elegant glass in the hand of the man across the aisle. The message was as clear as it was insulting. He didn't say a word. He simply picked up the cup, took a slow, deliberate sip, and met his wife's gaze. Her eyes conveyed a universe of shared understanding and resilience. They would endure this, for now. But Riley Young had just made the most significant miscalculation of her professional life. She had mistaken dignity for weakness, and in doing so, had armed her own executioners. The Airbus A330 climbed to its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, a silver dart against the deep blue of the upper atmosphere. Below, the Atlantic Ocean was a vast, indifferent expanse. Inside the first-class cabin, the gentle hum of the engines was a backdrop to the quiet civility of transoceanic travel. Lunch service was about to begin, and for Riley, this was her theatre. She relished the ritual, the crisp white linens, the polished silverware, the carefully plated appetizers. It was a performance of elegance, and she was the director. It was here she could exert the most control, subtly rewarding those she deemed worthy and punishing those she did not. Sophie approached her in the galley, holding the manifest. "Riley, I'm just confirming the meal orders. I see the Murphys in 1D and F pre-ordered the pan-seared salmon." Riley was examining a plate of smoked duck breast, turning it this way and that. "We're out of the salmon," she said, without looking up. Sophie blinked. "But we loaded 20 specials for the 18 passengers in first. I double-checked the count myself during boarding. There should be extras." "Well, there aren't," Riley snapped, her voice sharp. "Something must have been miscounted. They'll have to have the chicken, or the pasta." Her tone implied that even these options were a magnanimous concession. Sophie knew she was lying. The chill in the galley had nothing to do with the refrigeration units. This was a deliberate, calculated act of hostility. "Okay," she said slowly, making a note on her tablet. "I'll let them know." "No, I'll handle my section," Riley cut her off, taking the tablet from her hand. "You go take care of the business class cabin prep." It was an order, a dismissal. With Sophie out of the way, Riley began the meal service. She moved with a practiced grace, presenting menus and taking orders with a deferential smile. When she reached the Murphys, Her entire demeanor shifted. The smile vanished, replaced by a mask of bored indifference. "I'll be taking your meal orders," she announced, not waiting for them to acknowledge her. "We pre-ordered the salmon," Annalise said pleasantly, closing her book. Riley feigned a look of mild surprise, tapping at her tablet for a show. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "It seems there's been an error. We're completely out of the salmon. In fact, it was so popular, we ran out before we even got to this row." This was a new, more audacious lie. Ben Carter in 2D, who had just been served the salmon, paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. He glanced at the Murphys, then at Riley, and his thumb once again found the record button on his phone. Justin Murphy's gaze was steady. He had seen this tactic before in delicate negotiations, the creation of an artificial scarcity to diminish the other party. "That's peculiar," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. "Because you just served the gentleman behind me the salmon not 30 seconds ago." Riley's face flushed a blotchy red. She was not used to being challenged so directly. "He must have received the last one. My apologies. The options remaining are the roasted chicken or the cheese tortellini." "The chicken will be fine," Annalise said quickly, trying to de-escalate. She gave her husband a subtle look, a silent plea to let it go. But Riley wasn't finished. She saw their concession not as an act of grace, but as a victory. She decided to press her advantage. "Of course," she said, a small, cruel smirk playing on her lips. "I'm sure it's what you're more used to anyway." The comment hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was no longer a microaggression. It was a blatant, ugly insult. The cabin, which had been filled with the low hum of conversation, suddenly felt silent. Several passengers who had overheard the exchange looked up, their expressions ranging from shock to discomfort. Justin Murphy slowly placed his newspaper on the console. He looked directly at Riley, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than patience in his eyes. It was a cold, analytical focus, the look of a man assessing a threat and calculating the precise, most effective response. "What did you just say?" he asked. His voice was quiet, yet it carried an immense weight that seemed to suck the air out of the immediate vicinity. Riley, realizing she had perhaps gone too far in front of witnesses, backpedaled, but clumsily. "I simply meant that the chicken is a very popular, a very standard choice. A safe bet." "No," Annalise said, her own voice now losing its warmth. "That is not what you meant. What you meant was a deliberate and unprofessional insult. We will have the chicken, but I want you to know that your conduct has been noted." Riley felt a surge of defiant rage. Who were these people to lecture her? Her, with 23 years of service, of placating entitled billionaires and coddling celebrities. "My conduct," she said, her voice rising slightly, "is to provide service. If you're unhappy with the options, perhaps you should have considered that first class has standards. Not everyone is suited to it." It was the final straw. She had, in one breath, questioned their right to be there, their class, their very presence. She had drawn a line in the sand, separating them from everyone else in the cabin. Justin Murphy didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply held her gaze and said, "You are quite right. First class does have standards, and you have just failed to meet every single one of them. Please fetch your purser. If you are the purser, then please inform the captain that we require a moment of his time. This is no longer about the meal service." Riley's heart hammered in her chest. The captain? No passenger ever demanded the captain unless it was a major security issue or a medical emergency. The audacity was breathtaking. "The captain is busy flying the plane," she sneered. "He doesn't have time for petty complaints about the menu." "This isn't a petty complaint," Justin said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "This is now a formal issue. You have two options. You can get your superior, or we can discuss this with federal officials when we land at Dulles. The choice is yours. But this conversation, with you, is over." He then picked up his newspaper, a clear and final dismissal. Annalise had already reopened her book. They had shut her out completely. Riley stood there for a moment, her face a mask of fury and confusion. She had intended to put them in their place, but she had instead cornered herself. She looked around and saw the other passengers staring, their expressions a mixture of pity and contempt for her. She had lost control of her theatre, and the main act was just about to begin. Humiliation burned in Riley's chest as she stalked back to the galley. To be dismissed so coldly, so publicly, was a profound insult to her seniority and her sense of self. In her mind, the Murphys were now more than just irritants. They were aggressors who had deliberately tried to undermine her authority. Sophie was in the galley, her face pale with worry. "Riley, what happened? I heard your voice." "They're causing trouble," Riley seethed, yanking open a compartment with unnecessary force. "Completely unreasonable. Complaining about the salmon, demanding to see the captain. It's an absolute power trip." "Maybe you should just get the purser, Mark," Sophie suggested gently. "Let him handle it." "I am the senior crew on this flight. Mark is junior to me. I handle my own cabin," Riley retorted. Her pride was too wounded to allow her to ask for help, especially from someone she considered her subordinate. She believed that to back down now would be a catastrophic loss of face. She would handle this herself. She would put them in their place, once and for all. She composed herself, smoothing down her uniform, and pasted on a look of stern authority. She returned to row 1, intending to deliver a final, cutting reprimand about airline regulations and the chain of command. "As I was saying," she began, her voice tight with suppressed anger, "the captain is not available. Any complaints you wish to file must be submitted in writing after the flight. That is the procedure." Justin Murphy did not even look up from his paper. It was Annalise who responded, her voice calm and dangerously precise. "This is not a customer service complaint, Ms. Young. This is now a matter of international protocol. You have made it so." Riley let out a short, incredulous laugh. "International protocol? What are you talking about? Are you threatening me? Because I should warn you, interfering with a flight crew is a federal offense." This was her trump card, the line that always made belligerent passengers back down. But the Murphys didn't even flinch. Justin slowly folded his newspaper and placed it beside him. He looked at Riley, his eyes devoid of emotion. "You're right. Interfering with a flight crew is a serious offense, as is the failure of a flight crew to render proper courtesies and assistance to diplomatic personnel on official travel. It is, in fact, a violation of the policies of every major international carrier, including this one." Riley stared at him, bewildered. "Diplomatic personnel?" she scoffed, the word tasting absurd on her tongue. "You?" The insult was plain. She didn't believe them. She saw a black couple in expensive seats, and her mind, clouded by years of prejudice, could only conjure up a few stereotypical possibilities. Entertainer, athlete, lottery winner. Diplomat was not on the list. "Yes," Annalise said simply. "Us." With a sigh, as if she were disappointed it had come to this, Annalise reached into the elegant leather tote bag at her feet. She retrieved a small, hard-bound case. From it, she produced 2 passports. They were not the standard tourist passports with their cheerful blue covers. These were a deeper, more authoritative navy blue, almost black. Embossed on the front in brilliant gold leaf were the Great Seal of the United States and the words, "Diplomatic Passport, United States of America." She handed them to her husband. Justin took them and held them out for Riley to see. He didn't thrust them in her face. He simply presented them, the way one might present credentials at a security checkpoint. The gold lettering seemed to catch the cabin light, shimmering with an authority that Riley could not deny. For a moment, she just stared, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. The world around her seemed to slow down. The hum of the engines, the clink of cutlery, the low murmur of the cabin, it all faded into a roaring silence in her ears. Her mind raced, desperately trying to find an explanation. They must be fakes, a high-quality forgery. But her training, buried deep beneath her prejudice, screamed at her that they were real. She recognized the specific font, the texture of the cover, the sheer, unyielding presence they commanded. Ben Carter, in seat 2D, had his phone perfectly angled. He zoomed in, capturing the passports held in Dr. Murphy's steady hand, then panned up to Riley's face as the color drained from it. Her expression shifted from smug superiority to disbelief, then to dawning, gut-wrenching horror. As I said, Justin Murphy's voice was low and steady, cutting through her shock. This is now a matter of protocol. Your actions, your words, and your refusal to serve us in accordance with our ticket and your company's own policies could be interpreted as a slight, not just against us, but against the government we represent. So I will ask you one last time. Please, go and inform the captain that Senior Cultural Attaché Justin Murphy and Special Counsel Annalise Murphy of the State Department need to have a word with him. Immediately. Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling the shabby edifice of Riley's authority. Senior Cultural Attaché, Special Counsel, State Department. These were not just job titles. They were statements of power, of a world Riley had no access to and no understanding of. She had not just insulted a passenger. She had insulted a representative of the United States government. Her hand trembled as she reached out and took the passports. The leather felt heavy in her palm, like a pair of lead weights. She opened one. Dr. Justin Murphy. Official title listed. Government seal. No nonsense photo. She opened the other. Dr. Annalise Murphy. Same credentials. Different photo. They were real. Utterly, terrifyingly real. The smirk was gone. The sneer was gone. All that was left was the stark, cold terror of a woman who had just walked off a cliff and was only now realizing she was in mid-air. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked, almost ran, towards the front of the aircraft, towards the cockpit door, clutching the 2 blue passports that were about to end her career. The short walk from row 1 to the cockpit door was the longest of Riley Young's life. The plush carpet felt like quicksand, each step a struggle. The eyes of the other first-class passengers followed her, their whispered condemnations a scorching wind at her back. She could feel their judgment, their schadenfreude. The theatre was hers no longer. She was now the unwilling actor in a tragedy of her own making. Her mind was a maelstrom of panic and denial. Diplomats. It can't be. They don't look like diplomats. Diplomats are old, stuffy white men in ill-fitting suits. The stereotype was so deeply ingrained in her psyche that reality itself felt like a lie. But the heavy, official passports in her hand were undeniable proof of her catastrophic error. She pressed the intercom button for the cockpit, her finger shaking. "Captain Mitchell, this is Riley. I need to speak with you. It's urgent." A moment later, the electronic lock clicked open. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her, shutting out the prying eyes of the cabin. The cockpit was dark, save for the glow of dozens of instruments on the console. Captain Robert Mitchell, a man with a salt-and-pepper mustache and a reputation for military precision, turned in his seat. The first officer, a younger man named Paul, kept his eyes forward. "What is it, Riley?" Mitchell's voice was calm, but held the no-nonsense tone of a man responsible for 200 souls. "Is it a security threat? Medical?" Riley swallowed, her throat dry as dust. "No, Captain. It's a passenger issue." Mitchell's brow furrowed. He hated passenger issues. "We're in the middle of an oceanic crossing. Unless someone is actively trying to open a door, it can wait." "I don't think this can, sir," she stammered, holding out the diplomatic passports like a peace offering. "It's the passengers in 1D and F, the Murphys." Mitchell took the passports, his experienced eyes immediately recognizing their significance. He opened Justin's, read the name and title, then Annalise's. He looked up at Riley, his expression unreadable but intensely focused. "Senior Cultural Attaché and Special Counsel for the State Department. These are serious people, Riley. What's the problem?" This was the moment she could have tried to spin the story, to paint the Murphys as demanding and unreasonable. But looking at the captain's stern face and the official documents in his hand, the lies caught in her throat. The truth, ugly and damning, was all she had left. There was a disagreement over the meal service," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "A disagreement?" Mitchell pressed, his gaze hardening. "Riley, people with these passports don't get into disagreements over salmon. They are trained to de-escalate, to be invisible. For them to escalate it to this level, you must have done something. What did you do?" The story tumbled out, a pathetic, disjointed confession. The pre-departure drinks, the plastic cups, the lie about the salmon, the comments. Each admission was a nail in her own coffin. She tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a stressful day. But the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. She didn't dare repeat the most explicitly prejudiced remarks, but she didn't have to. The captain could read between the lines. When she was finished, a heavy silence filled the cockpit. Paul, the first officer, stared pointedly at his instruments, pretending not to listen. Captain Mitchell slowly closed the passports and handed them back to her. His voice, when he finally spoke, was glacially cold. "In my 25 years of flying, Ms. Young, I have never encountered a more unprofessional, disgraceful and frankly dangerous breach of conduct. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She shook her head mutely. "You haven't just insulted a passenger. You have created a diplomatic incident at 38,000 feet. These people are guests of foreign nations. They broker treaties. They represent our country abroad. Their safe and respectful passage is not a courtesy. It's a national security interest. You did not deny a meal to a couple. You disrespected 2 ranking officials of the United States government. The legal and political fallout from this could be catastrophic for the airline. For us." He unbuckled his seatbelt. "Paul, you have the con. Maintain heading and altitude. I'll be back." He stood up, his tall frame seeming to fill the small cockpit. "Give me the passports. You will go to the rear galley. You will not speak to another passenger or crew member for the remainder of this flight. You are relieved of your duties. Is that understood?" "Yes, Captain," she whispered, her career dissolving before her eyes. Captain Mitchell emerged from the cockpit, the passports in hand. He walked directly to row 1, his uniform crisp, his bearing radiating an authority that Riley had only ever pretended to have. He stopped beside the Murphys' seats. Dr. Murphy, he said, his voice resonating with respect. I am Captain Robert Mitchell. Please accept my most profound and sincere apologies on behalf of Transatlantic Airways and my entire crew. There is absolutely no excuse for the treatment you have received. It is an embarrassment to this airline, and to me personally." He handed them back their passports. "Ms. Young has been relieved of her duties. The rest of my crew will be at your disposal for anything you might require. Anything at all. I have also radioed ahead to our ground staff at Dulles. Our head of customer relations and a representative from diplomatic services will be meeting the flight to personally hear your report and ensure this matter is addressed at the highest level." Justin Murphy nodded, accepting the apology with grace. "Thank you, Captain. We appreciate your prompt attention to this matter. It is the least I can do," Mitchell said. He then addressed the entire first-class cabin, his voice firm and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize for the disruption to your flight. Please be assured that the standards of this airline are far higher than what you witnessed today. We will now resume our service." He gave a final, respectful nod to the Murphys and returned to the cockpit. The message was unmistakable. Riley Young was not just wrong, she was a pariah. Riley, who had watched the entire scene from the front galley, felt a cold dread wash over her. It wasn't just her job she was losing. It was her identity. She had been publicly stripped of her authority, her dignity, her very purpose. As she made the walk of shame down the aisle, past the silent, staring passengers, towards her exile in the rear galley, she finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. She hadn't just picked a fight with a passenger. She had declared war on a world that was infinitely more powerful than she could ever have imagined, and it was a war she had already, irrevocably, lost. For the next 5 hours, Riley sat on a jump seat in the rear galley, a ghost on her own flight. The sounds of the cabin service continued without her. The cheerful chatter of Sophie and the other flight attendants, the clinking of real glasses, the low murmur of satisfied passengers. It was a world she had once commanded. Now she was an exile within it. Every laugh felt like a mockery, every polite request a reminder of her own spectacular failure. She replayed the events in her mind, a torturous loop of her own sneering words and the Murphys' unshakable composure. The image of the gold-embossed passports was burned into her memory. As the plane began its descent into Washington, D.C., the fasten seatbelt sign chiming its final warning, a knot of pure dread tightened in Riley's stomach. Captain Mitchell's words echoed in her ears. Our head of customer relations and a representative from diplomatic services will be meeting the flight. This wasn't going to be a quiet chat with HR. This was an official reception committee. The landing was smooth, the rumble of the wheels on the runway at Dulles International Airport, a final, jarring confirmation that her ordeal was just beginning. As the plane taxied towards the gate, Sophie came to the back, her expression one of pity, not triumph. "Riley," she said softly, "the captain wants you to remain on board after the passengers have deplaned." Riley just nodded, unable to speak. She watched through the small porthole window as the jet bridge connected to the aircraft. The door opened, and the first-class passengers began to disembark. She saw the Murphys rise, gathering their things with the same unhurried grace they had displayed throughout the flight. As they passed the galley, Dr. Annalise Murphy paused for a fraction of a second, her eyes meeting Riley's. There was no malice in her gaze, no anger, just a profound, weary sadness that was, somehow, even more damning. After the last passenger had left, Captain Mitchell appeared, his hat now on, his face grim. "Come with me, Young," he said, his use of her last name clinical and cold. He led her not out through the jet bridge, but to the front service door on the other side of the aircraft. A set of mobile stairs had been rolled up to the plane. At the bottom, on the brightly lit tarmac, stood 3 figures. 2 were men in dark suits, their airline ID badges glinting under the lights. The third was a severe-looking woman in a tailored grey pantsuit who exuded an aura of immense, bureaucratic power. Beside them was a black sedan with government plates. Riley felt her blood run cold. This was a scene from a movie, a protocol for visiting heads of state or arrested criminals. "Riley Young, this is Mr. Gerald Finney, our Vice President of In-Flight Services," Captain Mitchell said, gesturing to the taller of the 2 men. "And this is Ms. Eleanor Vance from the Diplomatic Security Service." Mr. Finney, a man whose job was to ensure the airline's pristine reputation, looked at Riley with an expression of pure fury. "Ms. Young," he said, his voice low and trembling with rage, "in one 8-hour flight, you have managed to cause more damage to this airline's reputation than a fleet-wide engine failure. You have created an international incident, insulted 2 distinguished public servants, and made this company a global laughingstock before we've even landed." Riley opened her mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but he cut her off. "Save it. You are suspended indefinitely, effective immediately. You will be escorted from airport property. A formal investigation will begin tomorrow morning at 0800 hours. Your presence is not optional." Then Ms. Vance stepped forward. She was even more terrifying. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "Riley Young," she began, her voice devoid of any emotion, "my department is responsible for the safety and security of over 70,000 diplomatic personnel around the world. Their ability to travel without harassment or impediment is critical to the foreign policy and national security of the United States. Your actions today constituted a direct impediment to personnel on official duty." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "We will be filing a formal complaint with Transatlantic, the FAA, and the Transportation Security Administration. We will be monitoring their investigation closely. While you have not committed a crime that warrants your arrest today, be assured that the United States government now has a vested interest in the outcome of your career." The investigation began the next morning in a sterile conference room at the Transatlantic corporate headquarters. Riley sat alone at a long, polished table. Across from her were Mr. Finney, a stern-faced lawyer from the airline's legal department, and a union representative who looked deeply uncomfortable. They didn't need much from her. They already had everything. They had Captain Mitchell's scathing official report, detailing her insubordination and the disgraceful and discriminatory behavior she had exhibited. They had Sophie's tearful, detailed statement, corroborating every insult, every lie about the salmon, every moment of Riley's calculated cruelty. And then came the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. Mr. Finney turned a large monitor on the wall towards her. "We also have this," he said. "It was uploaded about 2 hours ago by a passenger named Ben Carter. He's a travel blogger with about 2 million followers. It's already been picked up by several major news outlets." He pressed play. Riley watched in horror as the video from Ben Carter's phone filled the screen. There she was, her face twisted in a smug sneer, condescending to the Murphys. The audio was crystal clear. Her lies about the salmon, her snide remarks, her incredulous, "Diplomatic personnel? You?" And then the climax, the slow, devastating reveal of the 2 dark blue passports. The video ended with a close-up of her face, the blood draining from it, a perfect mask of dawning terror. The video was titled, "Transatlantic Flight Attendant's Racist Tirade Ends in Humiliating Takedown." Riley stared at her own reflection on the dark screen, a stranger consumed by a petty hatred she could no longer recognize. There was nothing left to say. There were no excuses, no misunderstandings, no way to spin the cold, hard truth that had been captured on video for the entire world to see. She had not just been caught. She had been immortalized in her own disgrace. The investigation was over before it had even truly begun. All that was left was the sentencing. The official termination notice arrived 3 days later via courier. It was a cold, impersonal document filled with corporate jargon and legal clauses, but the message was simple. Riley Young's 23-year career with Transatlantic Airways was over. She was fired for gross misconduct, violations of company policy, and actions detrimental to the airline's brand and international relations. The union, faced with the irrefutable video evidence and pressure from the State Department, informed her they could not and would not fight the termination. She was on her own. But getting fired was only the beginning of her freefall. Ben Carter's video had not just gone viral. It had become a cultural moment. It was discussed on morning news shows, dissected by cable news pundits, and turned into countless memes and TikToks. Riley Young was no longer a private citizen. She was a public symbol of racism and entitlement. Her name and face were everywhere. She was Airline Corin, Passport Riley, the flight attendant who picked a fight with the wrong people. The public relations machine of Transatlantic Airways, desperate to contain the damage, went into overdrive. They issued a sweeping public apology to the Murphys and the State Department. They announced a multi-million-dollar donation to civil rights charities. And, in a move that sealed Riley's fate, they named her in their official press release. The immediate termination of Ms. Riley Young, whose actions are a profound betrayal of the values we hold dear. They threw her to the wolves to save themselves. Riley became a prisoner in her own modest suburban home. The phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters. Her social media accounts, which she quickly deleted, were flooded with messages of hate. A local news van parked across the street from her house for 3 days straight. Former colleagues and friends stopped answering her calls. She was radioactive. The life she had known, the small kingdom she had ruled at 38,000 feet, had been utterly annihilated. After a few weeks, when her savings began to dwindle, the panic set in. She had to find work. She was still in her 50s, with years of work ahead of her. She started applying for jobs: customer service manager, hospitality consultant, even a position at a regional airline. The initial phone interviews often went well. She was experienced, articulate, and on paper, a strong candidate. But then would come the inevitable background check, the simple Google search of her name. "I'm sorry," one recruiter told her, his voice thick with discomfort. "But we've decided to move forward with other candidates. A certain public profile issue came to our attention." Another was more blunt. "Are you kidding me? You're the passport lady? No, absolutely not." The rejections piled up. Dozens of them. Her name was now an unbreakable barrier to employment in any field that involved dealing with the public. Her pride, the very thing that had fueled her prejudice, crumbled into dust. She had spent her life judging others on their appearance, their station, their perceived worthiness. Now, the world was judging her, not for a single mistake, but for the character that mistake had revealed. Within 6 months, her emergency fund was gone. She couldn't afford the mortgage on her house, the house she had been so proud of, with its manicured lawn and carefully chosen furniture. The foreclosure notice was a final, humiliating blow. She sold what she could, packed the rest into boxes, and moved into a small, bleak apartment in a less desirable part of town. Her new life was a mirror image of her old one, twisted into a cruel parody. She, who had once served champagne in crystal flutes, now searched for coupons to buy groceries. She, who had prided herself on her immaculate appearance, now wore cheap, worn-out clothes. Finally, desperation led her to a temp agency that specialized in unskilled labor. They found her a position. It was night work, cleaning. Her first shift was at a downtown corporate office building. They gave her a grey smock, a cart with cleaning supplies, and a list of floors to cover. As she pushed her cart into a vast, empty lobby, she saw her own reflection in the polished marble floors. A tired, defeated woman in an ill-fitting uniform. She looked up at the building directory. It was an international consulting firm. Around 10 p.m., a few late-working executives came through the lobby, heading for the exit. They were laughing, talking about a deal they had just closed in Geneva. They didn't even see her. She was just a part of the background, a ghost mopping the floors, completely invisible. One night, several months into her new job, she was cleaning the executive washrooms on the top floor. A discarded newspaper was left on a counter. The headline on the society page caught her eye. It was a photo from a charity gala. In the picture, smiling warmly for the camera, were Dr. Justin and Dr. Annalise Murphy. They were standing with a senator and a foreign ambassador. The caption described their philanthropic work and lauded Dr. Murphy's efforts to create international cultural exchange programs. Riley stared at the photo, at the couple she had tried so hard to diminish. They were not just surviving. They were thriving. They were respected, admired, and powerful. They were everything she had pretended to be. In her attempt to prove they didn't belong in her world, she had been violently ejected from it, while they continued to soar in a stratosphere she could never reach. She crumpled the newspaper in her hand, the rough paper biting into her skin. There was no anger left, just a hollow, aching emptiness. The karma wasn't loud or explosive. It was a quiet, grinding, daily humiliation. It was the sting of disinfectant on her chapped hands, the anonymity of her grey uniform, and the crushing weight of knowing that she had single-handedly destroyed her own life over a prejudice as ugly as it was baseless. She was no longer Riley Young, senior flight attendant. She was just the cleaner, invisible to the very kind of people she had once so desperately looked down upon. While Riley Young's life was quietly and inexorably unraveling in the harsh glare of public disgrace, the incident on Flight 715 was taking on a new life. It transformed from a viral video into a national touchstone, a case study discussed in boardrooms, newsrooms, and family dining rooms. The story no longer belonged to the individuals involved. It belonged to the culture that was now forced to examine it. In their stately Georgetown home, surrounded by shelves overflowing with books on law, history, and art, Dr. Justin and Dr. Annalise Murphy found themselves in the reluctant eye of the storm. The world wanted them to be avatars of righteous anger, to celebrate the downfall of their tormentor. But in the quiet moments after the media calls subsided for the night, the prevailing emotion in their household was not triumph, but a profound and weary melancholy. "I saw her face on the news again today," Annalise said one evening, looking out the window at the rain-slicked street. They showed a picture of her from years ago, smiling, receiving some sort of service award. She turned to Justin, her brow furrowed with a complex emotion. "It's not satisfaction I feel. It's a waste. To build a life, a career, for over 2 decades, only to have it consumed by such a corrosive bitterness, to be so blinded by prejudice that you tear down your own world. It's a tragedy." Justin, who was reading a briefing paper, looked up and took off his glasses. He understood his wife's empathy, the core of her that made her such a brilliant human rights counsel. "It is a tragedy," he agreed, his voice a low, steady baritone. "But the larger tragedy is that her attitude is not unique. She was just careless enough to display it to the wrong people in the wrong setting. For every Riley Young who gets exposed, there are 1,000 others who dispense the same slights, the same indignities, every single day without consequence. That's the disease. She was just a symptom. This understanding shaped their response. They refused dozens of interview requests from sensationalist talk shows and aggressive news anchors. They had no interest in a media circus or in participating in the public flogging of one disgraced woman. Their target was the system that had allowed her prejudice to flourish for so long. When they finally agreed to a single televised interview, it was with a respected journalist known for her thoughtful, in-depth conversations. The interview was not conducted in a cold, sterile studio, but in their own study, the camera crew taking care to create an atmosphere of warmth and intimacy. The Murphys were not on the attack. They were educators. This was never about a meal or a plastic cup, Annalise explained, her voice calm and articulate, her hands resting in her lap. Those were merely the tools of disrespect. It was about the instantaneous, baseless assumption that we were unworthy, that our presence in a space someone felt we didn't belong in was an affront. It's a weight that many people, especially people of color, carry every day. A constant need to justify your existence in spaces where you have every right to be. The only difference here was the passports. The journalist, captivated, leaned forward. But some might say you were right to use them, to use the power you had. It wasn't a tool of power, Justin clarified gently but firmly. It was a tool of de-escalation. The situation was becoming untenable, and we used the only language Ms. Young and the airline would be forced to understand. But it's a deeply troubling thought that one's credentials are a prerequisite for their humanity. Human dignity should be the only passport required for respectful treatment. Our hope is that this unfortunate event can be a catalyst for change. It's an opportunity for companies to look inward and ask themselves if they are truly fostering an environment of inclusivity, or if they are simply tolerating a culture where prejudices like Ms. Young's can fester for 20 years unchecked. Their words landed with the force of a perfectly reasoned legal argument. They were not victims seeking pity, but leaders demanding a higher standard. The interview sent shockwaves through the corporate headquarters of Transatlantic Airways. Mr. Gerald Finney watched it in a conference room with the CEO and the entire executive board. The Murphys' grace and intelligence made the airline's failure appear even more stark. "They just handed us a road map," the CEO said, breaking the silence. "They didn't sue. They didn't drag us through the mud. They told us how to fix it." Mr. Finney, who had been tasked with leading the damage control, felt a surge of genuine determination. This was no longer just about saving the stock price. It was about fundamentally changing the company's culture. He championed the creation of a new, comprehensive training program. Heeding the Murphys' advice, they hired a top-tier diversity and inclusion consulting firm. The initiative was named Dignity in Flight, a title that directly honored the Murphys' public plea. It was a massive, expensive undertaking, but the cost of inaction was now clearly immeasurable. At the heart of this new chapter, for the airline, was Sophie. Her clear, honest, and empathetic testimony during the investigation had made her a standout. Mr. Finney had called her into his office personally. "Sophie," he had said, his demeanor serious but kind, "what happened on Flight 715 was a failure of our culture. But your actions, you were a bright spot in a very dark moment. You showed courage and integrity. This airline needs leaders like you, people who see passengers as people, not problems." He had then offered her the promotion to cabin purser, a significant jump she had not expected for years. 6 months later, Sophie stood at the entrance of a 787 Dreamliner, welcoming first-class passengers onto a flight from Paris to New York. The promotion felt less like a reward and more like a profound responsibility. The ghost of Riley Young was a constant, cautionary tale in her mind. She greeted each passenger with a warmth that was genuine, not practiced. She noticed the small things. She helped a Nigerian tech entrepreneur who seemed nervous about his first-ever international first-class flight figure out the complex seat controls. She spoke with an elderly Indian couple, learned it was their 50th wedding anniversary, and discreetly arranged for a special dessert and a card, signed by the crew to be presented to them mid-flight. Her most meaningful interaction was with a young black woman in a lightweight, custom-built wheelchair, a celebrated Paralympian on her way to a speaking engagement. Sophie didn't speak to the companion pushing the chair. She knelt slightly to speak directly to the woman at eye level. "Welcome aboard," Sophie said with a bright smile. "My name is Sophie, and I'm your purser for this flight. Please let me know if there is anything at all we can do to make your journey more comfortable. We have the aisle chair ready if you need it, and I've already ensured the forward lavatory is fully accessible for you." The athlete's face broke into a relieved, grateful smile. "Thank you. That means a lot. Usually, I have to ask for everything 3 times. It's like I'm an inconvenience before I've even sat down." "It is our absolute pleasure to have you on board with us," Sophie replied, and she meant every word. Later, as the plane reached its cruising altitude and the cabin lights were dimmed for the overnight journey, Sophie stood for a moment at the front of the quiet cabin. She looked at the diverse group of people who had placed their safety and comfort in her hands. The memory of Riley's sneering face and the cold fury in Captain Mitchell's eyes was still vivid. That day had taught her a lesson that no training manual ever could, that the uniform she wore was not a symbol of authority over others, but of service to them. The ugly echoes of Flight 715 had not faded completely. But here, in the gentle hum of the aircraft and the soft glow of reading lights, a new harmony was being composed. It was a melody of respect, born from the discord of prejudice. In this cabin, on this flight, and on every flight she would command from now on, dignity was the only passport that mattered. The story of Riley Young and the Murphys is a stark and powerful reminder that our actions, especially those born from prejudice, have consequences that can ripple far beyond a single moment. It shows how dignity and grace can be more powerful weapons than anger, and that true status isn't about where you sit, but how you treat people. Riley's fall from grace wasn't just about losing a job. It was the complete dismantling of a worldview built on a false sense of superiority. It's a chilling illustration of how karma, when it arrives, can be as methodical and unforgiving as the prejudice that summoned it. What do you think? Was this a just outcome, or a tragedy of a person consumed by bitterness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of respect and dignity, please hit that like button, share this video with others, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life stories where choices have profound and life-altering consequences. Thank you for listening.